I'm going to have you begin by introducing yourself.
Sure. Hi, Sharon. My name is Inderpreet Kaur. I am a community development manager at the Sikh Coalition, which is a civil rights organization that works to fight hate crimes, also works to raise, the Sikh profile, Sikh awareness.
Okay, so here we are. We're talking after yet another, there's been quite a few mass shootings and incidents of violence that have been happening recently. Another one recently happened in Indianapolis. We know that 8 people were killed and 4 of whom were members of the Sikh community. I'm just wondering if we can maybe start with your reaction when you learned of this incident. Let's just start with that.
Yeah, sure. If I'm sharing my personal experience, Sharon, it was really when I first learned about the shooting was right before going to bed. I remember I saw the CNN article, the little notification pop up on my phone, and I thought to myself, "Wow, another shooting." And I told myself, I was like, "Okay, first thing tomorrow morning, I'll read up on this. I don't want to go to bed thinking, too much into this." And then the next morning is when our organization and my team members had found out that out of the 8 that were killed, there were at least 4 Sikh community members that were also either harmed or were killed. We were getting very slow updates, as were the families. And I will say that it was very traumatic to go through that again. Our entire community is completely saddened by the loss of both our fellow Sikhs and their colleagues. It's not just about the Sikh lives that were lost; it's also the other 4 that were lost as well. And we're mourning them as well as all of Indianapolis is mourning this senseless tragedy altogether. And we're making sure that we're keeping those that are injured in our thoughts and prayers and hoping for a very speedy recovery. And also hoping that justice will be served as the investigation goes on.
So you and I were talking just before we started recording this, and I was sharing with you that in 2012, I was at a Gudwara covering the aftermath of the Oak Park, Wisconsin shooting that left a total of 7 people dead, 4 were injured. Thousands of people were traumatized, though, and here we are almost a decade later. And sometimes it seems like we make a little progress and then something like this happens. And you were even contextualizing how a decade before that there's other traumatic events. So what are you kind of bringing from that bigger picture and this notion that sometimes we make progress and sometimes we make big steps backwards?
Yeah, that's a great question, Sharon. I will say, just to reemphasize that the trauma it continues to grow, unfortunately. It feels as if just when the community begins to heal, all of a sudden there is something else that we need to be worried about, something else that we need to be fighting for. And it gets very tiring. I read this post the other day that some of our friends had reposted and tweeted, saying that a lot of the people I know are tired. And I really felt that. A lot of the people I do know in our community and in other communities as well, we are very tired of having to be victims of these violent crimes. And so, to answer your question, I really hope that this is all of these events that have been taking place are conversation starters. We need to begin having a conversation on how we can put an end to these senseless crimes that are going on, and how can we end this cycle of trauma. And I know that's a very generic answer to your question, but I'm trying to unpack it as I'm thinking as well. So I hope that answers your question.
It does, and it's a big, broad, abstract question that's hard really to distill down. It's very hard to distill it down, and even to figure out the emotions and all the things that kind of go into that. Um, I apologize for my phone in the background. Let me get it off.
No worries. That's a good reminder for me too.
I know it's actually on silent, but it's vibrant. I was sitting on it. um, so where were we going to go with this? We were talking about kind of the, how we make some progress and then some, something happens and we kind of get set back and we have to kind of go through it all
Yeah.
over again. Oh, I know what I was about to ask you. Just yesterday, I was interviewing some filmmakers about the forthcoming documentary, really documenting the struggle of Sikh farmers in India,
Yeah.
and many who are standing in solidarity. And there, we were talking about at least there's more than 300 people who've lost their lives, right? Um, so it does seem like there's like Sikhs around the world seem to be suffering right now. That's what I'm feeling as I'm hearing about this massive movement in India, and then this other piece of the puzzle that was kind of in the back of our minds. We knew that a mass shooting had happened, and then we found out about who's impacted by this, right? And the headlines almost get buried because there's other incidents of racial violence that have been happening in the country. So I guess what are you taking from this moment right now, or what should people be taking from this moment, and what can people be doing to stand in solidarity with Sikhs right now?
Yeah, thank you for bringing up the farmer protest, Sharon. I feel like that's a component that's really also is playing a huge role in what our community is feeling right now. I'm not too sure if you're familiar, but the month of April is actually a very auspicious month for us, just because our one of our main holidays called Vaisakhi. It's when the Sikh religion was founded in 1699. It's our anniversary, our birth anniversary. And so, April is also culturally a very significant time for Punjabis or for farmers, because it's the month of harvest. That's when a lot of these farmers are harvesting their crops, getting ready for a new season. And so, Vaisakhi doesn't look the same this year. Our April does not look the same this year. Back home, we have a farmers' protest that is going on. And of course, around the world, we're unable to celebrate as we usually do because of the pandemic. And third, now we have these mass shootings that are going on in the United States, which are, absolutely heartbreaking, not just for our community again, but for other communities as well. And I will say that the best thing that we can do right now, moving forward, is making sure that we're having a conversation about the violence that is going on in this country, and including other communities in this as well, making sure that this space is as inclusive as possible, so we can protect everyone. And so I already know that some community members here in Southern California, where I'm based at in Los Angeles, we're already beginning to have these conversations on how can we protect our houses of worship? How can we stay more alert to make sure that these incidents don't happen? And it's unfortunate because we never know when these incidents will happen or where will they happen. It seems as if it doesn't have to be at a school. It does not have to be at a mall. It happens even at work for some folks, right? And that's the most unfortunate part of it all, is that you can take so many precautions and yet still fall short. And so how can we brainstorm together as a community to make sure that we're keeping everyone safe?
Yeah, and that is a complicated question, unfortunately. And the other thing that is occurring to me, if I'm remembering correctly, I think when the Oak Creek, Wisconsin incident happened, perhaps the shooter had intended to harm Muslim people but had mistaken the identity. Islamophobia is a problem. Xenophobia is a problem. Anything that targets anybody is a problem. And maybe this doesn't change your answer, but is there anything you want to elaborate on that, about maybe the ways in which this underscores the importance of really being allies to each other?
Yeah, I will say, and I do want to emphasize this too, Sharon, just because there is an ongoing investigation. We are unsure of what the motive was for the shooter, but it is clear that it was a very hateful motive and a violent one. And it just is a reminder that this is an ever-present threat to all of us. And so I would say that check in on your Sikh friends, right? Check in on your Black friends, check in on your Asian friends and have that conversation with them and ask them, how are they doing? I think one step that we can take in terms of creating an allyship or creating that kind of relationship is starting that conversation and making sure that we're checking in on our folks that are unfortunately going through a very difficult time right now. And again, a lot to unpack there, and it's a difficult question to answer. But I believe that one step that the community all over the country can take is just first step is reaching out and making that first step, and then continuing that relationship and that allyship to stand in solidarity with them, whether it's having protests, whether it's having open houses at your houses of worship to learn more about one another. It's all about that conversation, and it doesn't matter how you spark it, but it's very important to make sure that you do take do take action.
And I appreciate you bringing up the sort of the intent versus impact. There's the investigation piece. Of course, the shooter is not alive anymore. So that piece of the puzzle, we're kind of left scratching our heads, wondering why. Uh,
Yeah,
but even with thinking of intent versus impact, the impact is that a community has been harmed. And as you said, other people, like a number of people have been harmed, plus
yeah,
all the people whose lives were connected with those. Um, and so this question will be a bit speculative, perhaps, but we do know that the gunman's mother had expressed concern about him in the past. We know that last April, the FBI had placed him in a mental health kind of detention for a short period of time and then released him because, at that time he hadn't committed a crime. What do you wish could have been done as kind of an intervention or some measure that could have been that could take place in cases like this where somebody is concerned, because this is not the first time that somebody like a relative has said, I'm concerned about this, and then months later or a year later something pretty major happens. So I guess, what would be your hope that we as a society could put in place to help an individual like this before something like this happens?
yeah. And that's a great question, Sharon. Actually, when you had right before our conversation, I had just learned that this was an issue in the past too. It's not something, folks were concerned about this, about, his behavior, or were concerned about just of what might happen. And it wasn't taken seriously, and there were no rules or regulations taken place at that time. That's what scares me. And I believe that's what, I can't speak for the whole Sikh community, but I know that's what scares them too, is that knowing that there was some sort of intervention that took place last year and nothing was clearly done at that time. Or if there was something done, it wasn't as serious as we hoped that it would have been. So, again, I can't speak on the whole Sikh community, but I do wish that there was more intervention at that time. And I do wish that those concerns were taken a little bit more seriously.
Okay, I feel like we've covered a lot in a short amount of time here. You've talked pretty articulately about some methods of allyship, um, and maybe those methods of allyship can perhaps assist in the healing. But we know that Sikhs around the world are struggling in a number of ways. We talked about the farmers' protest, and you are illuminating the fact that this is an auspicious time because of when the harvest would usually be, which I imagine is bittersweet this year under these strange circumstances. So I guess anything else you'd like to leave us with about what you hope the Sikh community could do in terms of healing, or what others could do to support that healing?
Yeah, absolutely. At the moment, with the Sikh Coalition, the organization and the civil rights organization that I work for, our main priority is to ensure that our community is receiving mental health resources. So that is something that we are taking as our top priority because, again, as we talked about, Sharon, is this is a very traumatic event that took place, not just for the victims' families, but also for the whole community as a whole. Because time and time again, we've been seeing these crimes take place against Sikhs, and it's just resurfacing those emotions that we had after 9/11, that we had after Oak Creek, and even after every hate crime that takes place. For example, we both live in California, and unfortunately California has the most amount of hate crimes against Sikhs, right? And so it's not something that is new for us, and it's not something that happens years later. Sometimes even months later we hear about these crimes. And so again, mental health is a priority for us. We're trying to support the Sikh community as much as possible with whatever resources they need. We're continuing to, tell them that stay alert, make sure that, especially our houses of worship are secure, have cameras put in place, and that they've taken, any trainings that will help protect them and their young ones and their family when they do go to the houses of worship. But in terms of keeping them prepared, it's always difficult to do that, right? Because again, we don't know when these incidents are going to take place, but all we can hope for is, for the community to heal after this and start having these conversations on how can we avoid these potential threats and how can we stop them from happening.
Yeah. I have a very heavy feeling on my chest as I'm just really letting the gravity of that sink in and thinking about, yeah, it's not just a place of worship. And I shouldn't say just a place of worship because that's a cornerstone, right? It's a place where people build community where they should feel safest,
Yeah.
and in workplaces. And yeah, I hope that one day we will be having a different conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's tough, Sharon, because you think about it, folks go to their house of worship, regularly once a week, sometimes twice a week, depending on what their faith looks like. And for our kids, for our children, the school is their second home, right? And knowing that even our kids can't be safe in their second home where they're spending 8 hours a day, 5 days at least not now, but before the pandemic, they were spending five days a week at the school, and if you don't feel safe there, are we, what can we do to make sure that folks are feeling safe in these little safe havens that we think they are, right? So yeah.
Okay, to end on a hopeful note, what is giving you hope right now, and what keeps you in the fight in spite of the fact that the despair is a little bit cyclical, and here we are a decade later going through another incident. So
Yeah.
what keeps you going?
To be honest, Sharon, it's folks reaching out. When I received your email offering your condolences, that makes me feel really. It makes me and makes our community feel much better knowing that there are folks out there that are being supportive, that are offering a platform for us to speak about these issues, and also knowing that we are building a community as we go through this. As unfortunate as this incident is, I've built so many relationships during these past 48 hours with folks like you, with reporters, with other, faith leaders, with community leaders from different communities. It makes me feel hopeful that even through the bad, that there are folks out there that are trying to build relationships, that are trying to be there for this community as much as possible. So that's a really good feeling to have at the end of the day.
Great. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
I will say that if there are any additional resources that our listeners are looking for on the Sikh faith, you can always visit our website. It's www.sikhcoalition.org. And please follow our social media pages. We are doing our best to keep everyone updated about the happenings around this case and also about the victims' families and any other information that they would like to share. So, please follow us, and we would love to share that information with you.
Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sharon, for providing this platform and reaching out.